Are you ready to take care of your parents? We are so happy that you've decided to join us today, and we can't wait to provide you with exclusive information and resources that will give you a deeper understanding of us and our services. My name is Emily, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Clinkscales Elder Law Practice. We have our main office in Hayes, and we have our other office in Wichita, and we serve clients and families throughout the entire state of Kansas. I would like to invite you all to type any questions that you may have in the chat box that's located at the bottom of your screen throughout the entire presentation. And then at the very end of the workshop, we will address any of those questions or concerns that you may have. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our attorney and president, Randy Clinkscales, to get us started.
Thanks, Emily. I want to welcome everybody today. Before we get started, I just would like to be sure that we have everybody can see the slides okay, and me as well. If you would, there's a chat box, a couple things there. If you have questions, feel free to type it into the chat box at the end. We'll address those. But for right now, if you would type Y, if you can hear me okay and see the slides okay, and type in if you're having some issues. And we'll wait just a minute.
Lots of Y's, Randy. We're looking good.
Okay. All right. So we're going to get started. And so our discussion today is, are you ready to take care of your parents? Let me just share with you, this is how I actually got started doing what I do today. I wasn't ready. And again, I'll get into the circumstances, but all of a sudden, I became a caregiver for a family member unexpectedly. I was fortunate enough that the person that I was caring for, which was my grandmother, still had capacity, and so I could get some direction. But just want you to know that 2/3 of us at some point, statistically, are going to take care of someone, participate in healthcare decisions, or even make end-of-life decisions for someone. So the odds are not in your favor if you think you're going to avoid this. And so it is really important to me. This topic is real important to me, that you're aware that that you're ready to take care of your parents. So as I said, if as we go along you have questions, please feel free to type the question into the chat box. And Emily is actually not here. Emily and Patrick Mahomes sprained their ankle on the same day. So Emily's working from home, but we hope she has a speedy recovery, but we really hope Patrick Mahomes has even a faster recovery. I'm kidding, Emily. So let's talk about today. You're going to discover ways to keep your parents at home, how to preserve and protect your parents' wishes, even if they can no longer make decisions or if they pass away, and decide how to pay for care for your parents without losing everything. And it's for you if you're a child of an aging or chronically ill parent and concerned that one day you may be called on to care for and make decisions for your parents. Or if you're someone that your parents don't have a plan. Let me just interject here. I'm healthy, don't have any healthcare issues, but my kids need to know what my plan is. And I've talked to them about that. So if you're wanting to, this plan is for you, this discussion for you is for you if you're wanting to be sure your parents are protected, or if your parents are wanting to pass on or protect a business or their property. If you or your parents are concerned about how to pay for long-term care, or if you're a parent that wants to be sure your wishes are followed by your children. And again, that's kind of where I am. I just want to be sure that my kids know what my wishes are. If something were to happen to my wife and I, whether that's death or incapacity, and that there's not any fighting. So imagine if you could wave a magic wand for your parents, what would it be? And again, let me just share this. This is what I hear when I meet with families. Their parents would like to stay at home as they age. They want to have a plan that ensures and empowers someone to carry out their wishes. And sometimes that can be a sticking point. I met with a family a couple days ago. They were struggling with which one of their kids are capable or willing to carry out their plan. If they could wave a magic wand, it would be important to know how to pay for care for your parents. And then again, if you could wave a magic wand to have peace of mind that your parents won't lose everything to long-term care cost, and that their legacy goals are protected. This is one of my old clients, a longtime clients, let me put it that way, Tad, who wrote this to me after his wife had passed away. And let me just read it to you. When my wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I tried to care for her myself. My son, a doctor, told me I had to get help or we would end up with two sick people. My banker recommended Clinkscales. Clinkscales helped me take care of myself and my wife. They helped monitor my care and my wife's care. If I ever had a question, I just had to pick up the phone. And just to let you know, if you ever, Tad actually has done a testimonial on our website, if you ever would like to take a look at that. Who is Clinkscales Elder Law Practice? These are my partners, Jenny Walters and Adam Deese, and that's me on the right. We focus on helping families preserve and protect their dignity, health, finances, and legacy. And we have offices in Wichita and Hayes, but we practice throughout the state. And we began in 1983, and as you can see, this is a anniversary year for us. And so we're excited about 40 years of practice in Hayes. And who am I? I'm an elder care attorney. And again, focus on people with aging and chronic care issues and protecting assets from long-term care costs. The 18 years have been the best. The last 18 years have been the best when I switched over to this focused practice. Belong to several different organizations. Probably the one that I think is important is I had the privilege of serving on Governor Kelly's Alzheimer's disease task force as the only elder law attorney, and also a founding member of the Life Care Planning Law Firm Association. This is my family. I have three sons. My wife there in the middle, who holds us all together, and then my two grandsons. So why am I so passionate? And I shared with you at the very beginning that I transitioned to this type of work when I had to start taking care of someone. And this is that someone. This is my grandmother. And just by way of background, my mom was living with my grandmother, taking care of her. My grandmother was ill. She was 86 when my mom passed away when she was 66. And so all of a sudden, I became a caregiver unexpectedly, and really felt like I had to do a lot of catching up. My grandmother lived in Fort Worth, and I lived in Hayes, Kansas, 560 miles away. So, what our practice is actually modeled after my journey with my grandmother. And what I learned from her is that she wanted to be independent. She wanted to stay out of the nursing home as long as she could. She wanted to protect her assets so she could maintain the style that she wanted, lifestyle that she wanted. And then what I learned is that I needed some assistance in caring for my grandmother, particularly as she went through the aging process. But the journey was wonderful, and I actually really enjoyed it. I took care of her for 10 years. But again, I was fortunate in the sense that when I took over caring for my grandmother, she was still cognitive. I could still change her plan. I could get the right documents in place. It would have been much more difficult if she had been incapacitated or even worse. So I was fortunate, but it really drove home the point to me about why it's important to understand what your wishes are. And so let me just share with you, at the time this happened, I still had kids in college. I had one coming out of high school. So I was trying to, and obviously running a business. And so all of a sudden, I was that sandwich generation, taking care of kids and also taking care of my not even my mom, my grandmother. So here's another one that I would like to share with you from one of our clients. And stated, my dad would have lost everything financially had it not been for Randy and his team using their expertise to divert what Randy termed the approaching train. Excuse me. What Randy did for our family was create a life care plan for my mom with a goal of keeping her safe and protecting as many of their assets as it could. We used our social services expertise, legal services, and all the other services that came with this plan. It was an investment that my dad and my sisters and I shared. Had we not done it, I am convinced my father would not have his house and the small farm he grew up on. The plan paid for itself 100 times over. If you're an individual wondering how you will one day respectfully care for your aging parents, consider checking into this law firm. So what I want to emphasize here is that this is written by the children who actually made the appointment to come see us because their dad was, really not going anywhere. And so by their intervention with their dad, we were able to protect him. So you need a legal plan to adequately and effectively take care of your parents. Today, you're going to discover there are ways to keep your parents at home, and if they have to transition, how to be sure they get good care. Your parents' wishes need to be stated and preserved in certain documents, but there are some hard questions that need to be asked and answered. And there are ways to pay for care. So let's transition to how to stay at home. And again, this is the most important goal. But what I talk with clients about, it's not your home versus the nursing home. There are a lot of things in between. One of them is learning how to accept assistance and support for the caregiver is key. So I'm going to pick on my grandmother again, and she was 86 when I took over her care. She was actually given 3 to 6 months to live. She had really modest resources in a home, but she wanted to live independently and alone. And I love to quote this from my grandmother. And she said, quote, "Honey, I know someday I'll have to go to the nursing home. I just don't want to know about it." And what she meant by that was that as long as she was cognitive, she was willing to run some risks to stay independent. So what we did is we found resources in the community. She was able to stay in her residence for 6 years. She actually went on hospice, and they wanted to move her to a nursing home. instead, we were able to transition her to assisted living and advocate for her there so she could stay. And she spent 4 more years there and eventually spent 50 days in a nursing home and died at age 96. Again, let me make some comments about it. Part of my challenge with my grandmother was getting her to accept assistance in her home. And it was an ongoing battle. And she was very resistant of that. And so I think I've gotten better at knowing how to convince people about that. I just wasn't very good at convincing my grandmother. When we eventually transitioned my grandmother to assisted living, she actually got much better, much stronger, more interactive, was eating better. We got her medications under control. They were just, I mean, she was up to 14 medications and we were able to carve it down to 4. So the lessons is with proper guidance, you can stay at home longer. The transitions can be gradual. I needed support as a caregiver to be able to advocate for my grandmother. And, really was happy that we were able to stretch my grandmother's resources so that she could stay in the environment that she wanted. So this is another example. And sometimes we call this the promise. I want to take care of my wife. That was my promise. And so Lane and Lisa came to us about 5 years ago. Both are in their 70s. Lisa has MS. Lane has scoliosis, which is a back condition. The children live in other states and have their own families and are too busy to help out. At the time of our first meeting, Lisa had just transitioned to an electric wheelchair. Lane realized part of the issue was that Lane realized he would be unable to help lift Lisa much longer. They had tried to find in-home help, but didn't really know what they were doing and had been through several different people. The problem was that both were concerned that Lisa may need to transition to a nursing home for the safety sake of Lane, which is kind of interesting. The financial resources were not an issue. Both were overwhelmed, however. Our solution is that our office helped find reputable caregivers. The first barrier was to convince Lane and Lisa to accept help, particularly Lane. Once we got the help in, we continued to monitor the help. We got Lane into therapy for his back. We created time off and days off for Lane. And we directed them on how to modify their home and lives for accessibility issues. I will tell you that Lisa is much happier today with our arrangement, knowing that she's not a complete burden on Lane. So today, Lisa's at home. Though the MS has progressed, Lane's back has continued to deteriorate. However, both are at peace, and we have an ever-evolving plan to keep them at home. And now that we're actually up close to 80. In fact, I think we're in the 80s now. 80. They're both over 80 now. This is a Parkinson case. Sherry, let me just read what she said. My husband had Parkinson's. You helped me keep him at home as long as possible. You showed me how to be a better caregiver. I could not have figured out how to pay for care with Medicare and Medicaid on my own. So what do you need to do if you're facing aging or chronic care issues? Meet with us for a strategy session. Don't wait. The longer you wait, the greater the crisis and the more limited the options. Don't give up. There are solutions. So again, if you're trying to keep your parents at home, or parents, if you're trying to stay at home, let's schedule a time that we can get together. We just don't want to crash and burn. We've learned that the earlier we can intervene, the greater the opportunity for success. And really it's a lot. It's just trying to prevent a major meltdown that we can't undo. So number two, your parents need to plan so their wishes are followed. Your parents need to decide, or a court will. I guess I want to emphasize a little bit, talked about the next one. Your parents can decide who has power to act for them. No one has automatic power. So Kansas is one of 4 states that the spouse or the children do not have automatic power to act for their parents. Unless there is a power of attorney or a legal proceeding granting to the spouse or the children the legal right to make decisions, there is no one to have that has power to make financial or healthcare decisions for them. And understand that if a court does it, the court's going to define what type of decisions they can make. And generally, those are going to be pretty restrictive. And the court's going to decide who's going to make them. On the other hand, your parents can express their wishes in writing, can decide what kind of powers and who's to have them. The essential documents, these essential documents can determine who can act and how and what kind of restrictions. There are certain legal planning documents that they need, and the investment can save the family thousands of dollars versus if they don't have it. So I'm going to give you some examples. So I'm going to give you a bad example first. So Mr. and Mrs. Wright attended a workshop. They had no estate plan, no powers of attorneys. They're a farming family. This is important to note. Some of the farm was in joint tenancy. Some of it was in just Mr. Wright's name. A lot of the farm equipment and there was a lot of farm equipment and livestock that was untitled. So they visited our office and went home to think about it. Unfortunately, Mr. Wright had a stroke. He lost capacity and eventually died. Mrs. Wright had no power of attorney to get their affairs in order prior to his death. As a result, the joint property was transferred to Mrs. Wright. The other property had to go through probate, with one half going to Mrs. Wright and the other half to the children. That caused a bunch of hard feelings when we were asking the kids to give the property back to Mrs. Wright. And part of it was they're afraid what she would do with it. Part of it was some tax consequences. And anyway, it was very hurtful. But we were able to get it back. But we had to go through a probate process, and it was complicated and expensive. Then we turned around with Mrs. Wright, and we set up a special type of irrevocable trust to protect her land. That way, if later on she developed dementia, or if she got remarried, or she got in a car accident, which she actually did, the land would be protected. So we set up powers of attorneys with one of the children that she felt like she could trust. And so later on, she was involved in an accident, but the land was protected in the irrevocable trust from the lawsuit. And so her wishes were protected and her land was protected. So one of the things that she told me afterwards was that we should have done something when we came in. Our delay cost us over $40,000 and created a lot of stress for me and my children. I wanted to share a case with you. Actually, Emily heard me talk the other day, and she said, you need to talk about this. So this is, there are several cases in the country about people who don't have healthcare or financial powers of attorneys. And this is one of them. The Cruzan case was actually a case out of Missouri. Miss Cruzan was driving home from work. She was involved in an accident in Missouri, where she lived. She went without, they're estimating she went without oxygen for about 20 minutes. The emergency people got to her. Eventually, she was intubated, and also she was, they surgically implanted a feeding tube. The doctors told Mr. and Mrs. Cruzan that really there was very, very little brain activity. So they had to go to court to get a guardian and conservatorship in order to make decisions for their daughter. They went to court to get permission to basically set her up on a DNR, do not resuscitate, and in addition, to allow them to remove the feeding tube. The case turned very political. The Attorney General of Missouri got involved. These poor people went through heck. They just wanted their daughter to be able to pass peacefully. Eventually, the case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they did find, and the U.S. Supreme Court actually ruled in favor of Missouri and would not let them pull the feeding tube. Later on, there was a new development in the case, and the feeding tube was removed, and she passed. Let me tell you the rest of the story. This was terribly hard on the family. Mr. and Mrs. Cruzan, near the end of their daughter's life, got a divorce. After their daughter passed away, about 6 months later, Mr. Cruzan took his life. They really went through a lot. And so we really talk very hard with our clients about financial and healthcare powers of attorneys, and to have a plan, and to encourage their kids to do the same thing. So let me just tell you somebody who's really proactive. So this is the Lundgren family. And so they actually contacted me from a neurologist office. Mr. Lundgren had been diagnosed with, they call it early cognitive decline, but signs of dementia. He's still very active farmer and has capacity. And actually, he had actually picked up on the memory loss and was concerned about it. And so he was very concerned about what happens if years from now he needs care. He's concerned for his wife and his children. He's concerned about his farm. So his quote to me when I met with him was, "I want to stay in control, but I want to be sure my wife and my land are protected." I want to share with you what the meeting was like. It was terribly emotional, terribly heartbreaking. They were very upset, of course. We spent quite a bit of time talking about what their goals were. And so then we outlined a plan. And so we set up broad powers of attorneys. We put the land into an irrevocable trust. We added Mr. Lundgren's healthcare instructions to his healthcare power of attorney. And we met with his agents, which was his children and his wife, to let them know what his wishes were. When we had our meeting, the second time, it was a completely different meeting. Mr. Lundgren was so proud, so happy. They were kind of joking around about, if he loses his mind later on, at least everything is protected. But it's just a completely different couple. So though it may be several years before he ever needs health assistance, his goals are guaranteed through his plan. His land is protected. He is going to continue to farm it. His wife has power to further protect the resources. His care goals are protected, and it takes a lot of pressure and guilt off his family. So again, let's talk about, what are we talking about here? We're talking about your parents need to plan so their wishes are followed. So if you're, how do they do that? Let's schedule a strategy session for your parents as soon as possible. Or parents, if you're out there, let's schedule a session. If you want to bring your kids in, let's do that. Act before capacity is an issue. Again, the Lundgrens, by their being proactive, were able to really do something, even though it could be 5 or 10 years before some of the plan is needed. Have your parents express their goals in their legal documents, and then to you personally, and have your parents empower their agents and caregivers to carry out their goals. And you know, don't give up. There are solutions. Even if we're further down the road, I met with, in fact, I responded to an email earlier today where dad is transitioning to a nursing home and mom's trying to stay at home. They've got farm ground, and they're wondering how are they going to pay for care. There are still solutions, and we're going to talk about how to pay for care here next. So how will your parents pay for care? Well, they can make a decision now on how to pay for care. They don't need to go broke if one of your parents needs care. Your parents may access government benefits to pay for care, such as Medicare, VA, and Medicaid. So let's talk about using planned resources to pay for care. And so this is a little different one. This is actually taking advantage of some long-term care insurance, but also taking advantage of Medicare advocacy and tapping into a Medicare policy or Medicare benefits. The Johnson family, both are in their 70s. Mr. Johnson has had a stroke with some resulting dementia and is in the hospital. He needs to be discharged. He has some income and investments. He has $200 a day of long-term care insurance for 3 years. They were going to transition him to a local nursing home. We actually had this case again, similar, just last week. But the nursing home is not a skilled facility. And so they were going to trigger the long-term care policy. And so that's going to eat it up pretty quickly. So let me talk about what we did. We actually, both in the Johnson case and in the other case, talked the family into transitioning the ill spouse to a skilled facility so that Medicare would pay. That's important, not only from the financial standpoint, but it's more important to me because Mr. Johnson is going to get skilled care. And with a stroke, boy, post-stroke care is terribly important in terms of getting better. So we also developed a plan for Mr. Johnson to come home and use the long-term care policy to pay for some home care and home improvements. And so the result was that he got care at the skilled facility that was paid for by Medicare for a period of time. He got well enough to go home with a lot of assistance. He got home care through Medicare. He had some assistance paid for by the long-term care policy. But Mrs. Johnson actually called us from the hospital. Her early involvement, her early phone call got the Medicare benefits extended, got the health improvements Mr. Johnson needed. He was able to return home, and the long-term care policy was extended, protecting assets because we're not using it all up right now. Then I want to give another proactive example. Mr. and Mrs. Smith are 72 and 70. And so I want to tell you up front, this appointment was made by their children. They had recently bought a long-term care policy that paid about $3,200 a month for 4 or 5 years. And the premium was not guaranteed, which they never are on the traditional long-term care policies. And so here are their resources, some money in IRAs and some investments. There's concern that if one gets sick, they're going to use up the policy and all the money. And they wanted to leave some money to their kids and grandkids. We helped them. And so their goal was we want to protect each other. But again, they wanted to leave some stuff to their kids and grandkids. We actually found a special type of policy for them that was actually a life insurance policy with a long-term care rider with no annual premiums. It's a $250,000 policy. They paid $150,000 for it. Okay, they paid it with IRA money, but there's no more premiums, and there's $7,000 a month long-term care coverage for 5 years. So it's a much better policy. They did it with IRA money. There's no tax consequences. If they use the long-term care portion of it, it just reduces the death benefit of the life insurance policy. So if they don't use it or don't use very much of it, their kids are going to get something. So I thought this was interesting. I actually spoke last Tuesday in Lawrence, Kansas, to a bunch of investment people and attorneys, and they were really unaware that this type of product is out there, which I thought was very interesting. So I had a lot of questions about that. And so it's again, I don't sell it. The point is that we're able to help the family ask the right questions, find the right resource for this type of tool. Now I want to transition to a case where we're really kind of in a jam and we're using Medicaid. So Mr. and Mrs. Goforth. Mrs. Goforth has something called Lewy bodies dementia. She has been discharged to a nursing home from the hospital. She was paying $8,000 a month. The assets of Mr. and Mrs. Goforth included his retirement of $300,000, a joint account of $60,000. He has Social Security of $1,500, and she has Social Security of $800. Just give you a heads up. There's a lot of advice out there in coffee shops and on the internet. And in this particular case, I mean, I always said there's more law practice in coffee shops and the internet than there is in the courthouse. But in this case, they were told by the nursing home and others that they would need to spend down all their resources before Medicaid would help. Mrs. Goforth would need to use his income to help pay for Mrs. Goforth's care, and Medicaid would put a lien on the home. And then Mr. Goforth was really worried that his wife would not get good care if she went on Medicaid. What is Mr. Goforth to do? So we met with him, and using some Medicaid tools and legal documents, we were able to restructure their assets. We were able to qualify Mrs. Goforth for Medicaid. And Mr. Goforth was able to keep all of his assets, all of his income, all of Mrs. Goforth's income, to support himself. And so why is this important? Because we don't want to impoverish the well spouse, because then they're going to go on government benefits. So by doing this, Mr. Goforth was not required to go broke. He has enough money to take care of himself, even though Mrs. Goforth is on Medicaid. There's no lien on the home, and he can sell it without losing it to Medicaid. He was able to keep all of his retirement, and our office was going to monitor his wife's care and advocate for her, giving him peace of mind that Mrs. Goforth is well taken care of. I want to add something here. If Mr. and Mrs. Goforth were wartime veterans, VA pension benefits may have been available. They were not, but sometimes VA pension benefits are available, and it's tax-free money, $2,200. I think it's a little bit more than that now, but that is important. That's something that we explore. So again, let's go back to what we're talking about here. How will your parents pay for care? And your next step is to schedule a strategy session as soon as possible. Let's explore all funding resources. Don't cancel anything. Don't stop life insurance. There just a whole bunch of tools that we have out there that we can explore with a family. Get in place strong powers of attorneys or other estate planning documents. Our goal is to help you get and pay for good care without going broke. And that's kind of our mantra in our office. This is actually one of the very first cases I ever had. The father and son came to see me, and this is from the son. Said, my father Henry and I met with this firm and decided to hire them. Best decisions of our lives. They had great knowledge and helped us apply for funds that we had no clue were available. They are there anytime you need them and return calls quick and with answers. Over the years, I've even become friends with a few of the staff. Great team to work with. And then finally, I want to share this one with you because I think this is real important. Pat came to us. This is not a picture of Pat, but Pat came to us at a very dark time of her life. Her husband was sick. They had worked hard all their lives, and now he was sick. And I think she was very unhappy with the cards that she had been dealt with by life. And we worked with her for quite a while. She actually became a great friend of our office, and really we turned around. I really think we enjoyed seeing her turn around, her outlook on life turn around. So she wrote this nice note, said, my husband needed nursing home care. You guided me through the process. Your care coordinators made sure my husband was getting good care. I highly recommend you because you're always there for your clients and will guide them through everything that goes on, things we never expected to go through. And I want to emphasize that a little bit because I think my journey with my grandmother was an adventure. It was my first rodeo. When I got one of our care coordinators involved in helping me, the whole thing changed, and I so appreciated that guidance. But I think the point is that you're probably not going to go through this journey more than once or twice in your life, and we're on this journey every day. And so I really think that we can help families that are facing these situations. So far you've discovered there are ways to stay at home, but you need guidance, and there are certain documents that empower you to care for your parents and to protect and preserve their wishes, health, financial, and legacy. Planning allows you to pay for care without losing everything, without putting a financial burden on children or other family members. And I think that's a big deal with me, is I don't want to be a burden on my kids, either financially or emotionally. So the more I can do to help them, that's what I want to do. So I hope you get this one thing. For most of us, almost all of us, at some point, someone is going to try to be carrying out our wishes. With proper planning, you can direct and control the plan. So how do you make that happen? So how this works is that we'll have a short phone call. You'll have a short phone call with our office to make sure it's the kind of case we can help you with. And please, I would encourage you to at least start there. Some people think their problem's too little or too big or whatever. Let's let us join with you and decide if we can help. If we feel like we can, then we'll have another meeting. And this first phone call will be with Macy in our office. But the second meeting will be with one of our attorneys, me or my two partners. And at that one, we'll get into more depth about what's going on. We'll discuss with you your parents, you and your parents, their financial and legal needs. We want to review their estate plan and establish with them what their goals are. A lot of times, this is the first time anyone has ever asked them that. And then we'll answer the questions that you have about your unique situation. And at the end of our time together, we'll have an analysis of your current plan, better clarity of your issues. We'll have a blueprint on how to achieve the goals, and we'll know the exact amount of the investment to achieve those goals. After our meeting, the most important thing you do is decide to get started. And to go back to Mrs. Wright, if they'd gotten started it would have been a $40,000 savings, but more importantly, it would have preserved a lot of family disharmony or harmony. So decide to get started. We'll meet together, draft a summary of your plan, prepare the necessary legal documents, meet again to get the plan in place. But understand, this is not about documents, it's about solutions to get what it is that your parents want to achieve. There are still some other tools and steps that we'll need to make, such as getting property titled correctly, make sure the right people have copies of the documents. If you're dealing with a chronic illness or aging issues that require assistance, we'll want you to meet with one of our care coordinators. We have a social worker and a couple of nurses on staff that would like to visit with the person that's got a chronic illness or aging issues. Typically, we would charge $650 for this strategy session, but it's free because you attended today. Sounds good. What's the catch? We've reserved 6 spots in the next 4 weeks for people who attended this session. You can call this number, or Emily is actually going to send you a SurveyMonkey link to follow up, where you can click into it, and that way we can contact you. So my personal guarantee is that after that meeting with me or one of my partners, you're going to know more than you did today. You're going to have an analysis of what happens if you do nothing. You're going to understand there are options available to guide and protect you and your family, and that's really important. And your time's not going to be wasted. So again, call the number on the screen, 877-325-8040, or Emily will send you the SurveyMonkey link, and just act. And if you do, then I will give you a copy of a book that I'm one of the co-authors what you really need to know for the second half of life, and also give you a summary of our recommendations. So again, call the number, free strategy session, an analysis, free written report, and the book. So Emily, I am going to turn it over to you and see if there are some questions.
Yes, we have some great questions this morning. The first one, once the farmland was received by the children, what was the rationale to transfer the land back to Mrs. Wright? And that was the example that you gave earlier.
Yeah, and so the issue was that Mrs. Wright needed the income. And she wanted to do with the land what she wanted to do. And so one of the kids was farming. There were a whole bunch of family dynamics. And so that's why we wanted to deed the land back to Mrs. Wright, because I mean, that was their intent. They just had not expressed it in writing.
Perfect. Another one here. If the only assets left are in cash form, can they still go to the healthy spouse? My understanding from other information is that there is a $137,400 limit to the healthy spouse.
That's the general rule. And actually it's a little bit more than that now. But sometimes we can convert the excess cash from an asset into an income stream, or we can, so in one case, we had a bunch of cash and we actually bought some land. Sometimes we'll convert the excess cash into an income stream using something called a Medicaid qualified annuity. We may pay off debt, we may make improvements. So I know that the one I referenced this morning to you on the email was that we're actually going to, there's probably $150,000 in cash that we need to spend down, and we're going to turn that into this special type of annuity to give the well spouse some additional income, because she really needs some additional income. So that's the general rule. But again, there are exceptions around those rules that or some planning tools that will get around those rules that we want to explore with the family.
Perfect. Another one here, Randy. I am a hospital case manager, and most of the patients who need the most amount of help with either long-term placement or help at home do not have many financial resources.
Mhm.
I would say it is rare for my patients to have long-term care insurance. Are your initial consultations free?
Yes, they are free. And she's right about long-term care insurance. It's almost a rarity anymore. There are fewer companies selling long-term care insurance today than there was 5 or 10 years ago. And so even though we talk with our clients about that, it is, it's rare that we get, I shouldn't say rare, but probably only 20 or 30% of our cases would have long-term care insurance, and usually they're limited.
Last question, Randy. When is the best time to start planning?
Well, right now, the issue always is that, I have a case right now, unfortunately, that I'm trying to think, she was in her late 40s, early 50s, developed a illness that made her almost instantly incapacitated mentally. And so luckily, I think 6 or 7 days before she got sick, the family had some estate planning done. And I had, at least I had a financial and healthcare power of attorney so that I could help her husband do some planning around her illness and planning about how to pay for care. So we never know when something's going to happen. I always tell people, let's get a plan down. We can change it later on based on what we want to do later on. But let's get a plan in place now because I do fear that barriers like incapacity or even developing a significant chronic illness that gets the clock ticking would prevent some tools and strategies that we could otherwise implement. So I'll tell you, when my kids turned 18, I had them go ahead and do powers of attorneys for healthcare and financial, as well as wills. Now they thought I was trying to take their money, and they didn't have any money. But again, it's just that important to me, is that I wanted my kids to have something in place so that if something were to happen, that my wife and I would be able to make decisions. And we talked about what kind of decisions do they want us to make for them. So, and that's an ever evolving discussion with the family. Okay, any others?
Randy, we just kind of had a comment here that many facilities in Southwest Kansas are critical access hospitals with the senior living unit, but they will not take the long-term care insurance. Is that something that we run into, or?
I've not run into that specifically. It doesn't matter whether they do or not. The long-term care insurance can be paid to the family, who can use the proceeds to pay for care.
Randy,
If that makes sense.
my name is Maddie. I'm a social worker in Ashland. We are in Southwest Kansas. We're
Okay,
a critical access hospital, and we have a 17-bed senior living unit. I do social services here, and I've had a couple of instances where we've had people who've lived in our community forever, and they've signed up for these long-term care insurance policies, thinking that our old facility was a nursing home and now we're critical access. And I've run into issues with these policies saying that even though we give that type of care, we're not considered long-term care or a nursing home, so they do not accept the payment. There was one facility that, I don't remember the company, but they did do a special claim. It took months for that claim to process, but then they did allow the payments to our facility for them. But the other two that I've assisted with, the companies would not allow their long-term care insurance, and they didn't have a cash value. So unfortunately, the families just kind of lost, or I encouraged them to go to a facility that they could use that policy, and then when that policy was to run out or whatever, they could consider coming back to us.
and yeah, I mean, I'd like to talk to you more about that. I mean, the question, we've had to contact the insurance commissioner a couple times because the company tries to make it narrow, and long-term care insurance is regulated by the state of Kansas. And as you know, Maddie, even though it may say that it doesn't cover assisted living, Kansas has ruled it has to. They don't have a choice. And so it'd be kind of a curious how the insurance commissioner would take a look at those policies. So
Definitely.
yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maddie. We did have another question here. It was mentioned Medicaid tools and legal documents. Can you expand on that statement a little bit, or is that something that we want to defer to our next workshop, February 16th? Will you be talking about that a little bit more?
Yeah, we'll touch on that. I mean, there are a whole bunch of Medicaid and tools, but Medicaid strategies that, I don't know. We'll be talking about that at the next session, but there are hundreds of them based on the circumstances. And so it's really kind of a case by case, an analysis of what goes on. And so is it that we're trying to avoid Medicaid in the future? Is it that we're trying to get on Medicaid now? Have there been actions by the family that would disqualify the person from Medicaid, and how do we work around those? There are strategies that allow us to do that if we get involved early enough. So the issue there always is that we have to really examine, before we apply for Medicaid, we really have to establish and examine what has gone on with that family for the last 5 years. So that's really critical. And then based on what has happened, if anything, many times there's not been anything that would disqualify that person from being on Medicaid, then we can look at some planning strategies to protect assets, or at least get qualified for Medicaid. And sometimes, we have families that come in that. So I visited with somebody early this morning where, the only issue is her mom has paid for assisted living for several years, and now she's down to $8,000. And what does she do next? And so we talked about a Medicaid program to get her on something called home and community-based services. So it's just, it's just making sure she crosses all the T's and dots all the I's to get her mom on Medicaid, and negotiating with that facility to establish the patient obligation. So again, there are hundreds of things out there when it comes to Medicaid, and we have 3 people in our office that do nothing but Medicaid. And so it is a tricky area of the law. So we'll touch on some of those at the next one, but yeah, there again, it's just there are hundreds of different types of things we have to consider.
Well, thank you everyone for all of the really great questions this morning. I don't see any more in the chat box at the moment, but please feel free to add in your questions now, as we're going to go ahead and wrap up our presentation for this morning. So I do want to kindly remind everyone that you will receive that follow-up email that Randy mentioned that contains the important things. It includes a recording of this session, and we provide that to you so you can share it with other family members, friends, colleagues, anyone that wasn't able to make the session today, or so that way you can just go back through and take notes on all of the important topics that Randy mentioned today. The other thing that email contains is the SurveyMonkey link, and I did also put it in the chat box here on Zoom, but you'll also get that in the email that's ready for you to complete. If you fill out the quick 2-minute survey, you'll receive that completely free strategy session where you can speak to one of our attorneys about your very unique situation. And I do want to reiterate that you can call our office anytime at the 877 number on the screen. If you have any questions regarding the strategy session, how it works, or when to do it, or if you have any other questions, we're just always happy to chat with you and answer the best that we can. So I would also like to invite you to stay up to date on our upcoming events on our website. I did mention our upcoming workshop on February 16th, that we talk about how to pay for long-term care and kind of go into some more specifics there. So that information is on our website, or you can always email me if you want to register for that free workshop as well. Yes, so great question about the February event. You can find that on our website at cleanscaleslaw.com/events. Or if you registered through me, my email address is emily@cleanscaleslaw.com. So you can just message me to get registered. It's free. It's another Zoom workshop just like this, but we'll go through more of those tactics about how to pay for long-term care that we kind of touched briefly on today.
Emily, I want to jump in just for a second. One thing, I looked at one of the questions about the Medicaid tools, but also they ask about the legal documents. And so I wanted to just summarize those really quickly. Basically it's HIPAA releases, financial and healthcare powers of attorneys, and wills and trusts. Those are what we call the fundamental essential documents. So I just wanted to, I didn't answer that part of the question.
Perfect. Yes, thank you so much for specifying that. And then our other questions asking about the afternoon session, it will be the exact same as this morning's session. So if you attended this morning, you're good to go. We just like to give 2 different options to accommodate people's schedules. So this afternoon will be exactly the same as this morning. And then, like I mentioned, I'll send out that recorded session of this morning in case somebody missed out on the session. So if you have any more additional questions, call us, email us. We'll be happy to answer those. And thank you all so much for your participation this morning and for joining us. It's been a true pleasure. And thank you, Randy, for sharing that information with us.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.